risk of getting it wrong can be mitigated again. You can read the primary sources, you can use your look around, look back, look forward strategies, read the cases that are cited, read the cases that cite them. And then most of these tools will give you the secondary sources. So you can go into that secondary source and then do that same kind of context looking around. And then I have here kind of at the bottom for each of these, I didn't mention it on the last one, is like a gut check. A senior attorney who knows the area of law well doesn't even really need to do this other stuff. They know the major cases, they know the area of law, they might not just have it to mind immediately. So I think the power for a senior attorney may actually be even greater and is not what's being studied in any of these studies, really. It's hard to get a senior partner to do anything, but you have law students who will do this kind of stuff, right? So I am really interested in how senior people are using it. Okay, so that's kind of the ad hoc secondary source. So then you can use this as one of your strategies to find the law. So both enacted law, statutes, regulations, et cetera, as well as case law, which I'll get to in a second. So here, this is the area where when they talk about accuracy in the studies, this is the part they're really on. Like, is it finding the right cases? Is it finding the right statutes? And this is where we see tons of hallucinations in the non-legal products. So if you're using ChatGPT, you may get cases that don't exist, statutes that don't exist. In using a legal product, there isn't as much that risk because they'll be linked out to your valid sources, but there are still risks here that you're not getting everything. So especially on a type of issue where you may need to consider not just like 5, 10 cases, but maybe you need to consider like 30, 40, 50 cases. I'm sure we've all had those projects before where you have a ton of cases that you need to somehow reconcile. Like no one has yet found the guiding principle like between all of these cases, and you need to reconcile a whole bunch of those. Because I think their sources are a bit more limited, that doesn't happen as easily. You also have like limited filtering in some of these products. So if you're really like in Ohio, we have intermediate appellate courts, and they are binding law within that district. And I believe similar in California. So I can't limit right now in any of the products to only one of my districts in the appellate courts. And so that's a big problem because if the law in that district is the most important to me, I can't filter down to that level. And that might also result in getting some irrelevant results. You also can't filter to like just case law, or just statutes. So one of the things that frustrates me a little bit is if I'm asking a question that I know is case law based or I know is statute based, it throws a bunch of irrelevant stuff in with it. So I think that these are probably things that they will try to fix, but for now, that's a problem. And then I think another risk here is in overconfidence. So like we hear about with this like intern mental model, like, oh, just ask the AI and then check the sources. But that doesn't really help you. If you just check the sources are good law, that doesn't really help you as to whether that's the complete answer and whether it's got all of the authority in it. But there is a tendency, and there have been a few studies started coming out on this, that you kind of, once you start offloading your cognitive work into an AI, you don't really get it back. Like you just keep doing it. So if you're already offloading the cognitive work, it gives back an answer, and then you're like, that's probably okay. And I found myself using ChatGPT this way. Like I know it gives inaccurate answers. Like if I go on there and ask about like whatever political thing that just came in the news, I'm like, okay, what's the deal with that? And I know that it's might not be accurate, but once I see it, it kind of sticks in my brain. And so I think there is a little bit of a risk for that overconfidence. but there can be a big benefit. Like statutory work can be really tricky, especially if you've got a whole bunch of statutes that kind of like are interweaving, and it can really kind of speed up that understanding. And I think also it can really help you find those sources faster sometimes. We all know how students and new attorneys hate using indexes, and they would rather just do their natural language search, and it does not work well with statutes. Well, this does work better with statutes, because rather than looking for keywords, it's able to find, okay, not just the word, but other concepts that are closely related to that word. So I found that it does do a better job finding statutes. And again, here, I think we can mitigate the risk here if we're intentional about it. So again, some of these other things that we've talked about that come in the legal research process, including reading the statute, including carefully defining your issue before you ask. Okay, and then reading them is kind of a separate thing from finding them. I would like to be able to test these separately. Like, is it finding the right things? And then when it's reading them, is it analyzing them correctly? So here we're in this bubble, read the law to determine relevance. And here, there can be hallucinations and inaccuracies in summarizing the statutes. So that is a risk, and I have seen it even with the legal products. Summaries might also miss nuance. And this is something that the University of Minnesota researchers found that some of the, let me see, I've got some quotes here I wanted to read. Yeah, that users were likely to include, whoops, I got the wrong one here. AI sometimes led participants to oversimplify legal questions, or in the case of ChatGPT, omit legal authorities altogether, which is a problem. So you might miss some nuance. And then the misunderstandings that are in that misnuance might be hard to catch even when you're reading the text of the statute. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. And again, you've got an overconfidence risk. But you're speeding up your understanding, maybe you're increasing accuracy. Again, another thing that I hope we could test in the future. All right, so now you're looking over at finding cases. I have personally found, like in my tests, that this can be helpful if other retrieval methods have failed. Again, it's like because it's a different kind of search, because it's not a keyword search, but it's more of a concept search. You might find things if you aren't using the right keywords, or if you're using a keyword that wasn't picking up a lot of cases. So I have been trying this when my other methods have failed. But again, because of the way the system interacts with like no filters, you might get fewer really relevant results. So it might not be as comprehensive. And your limited filtering, again, might lead you to irrelevant results. You also might not find cases that are binding law in your jurisdiction. So again, we had kind of talked about that. So lots of ways to mitigate this risk, including using this only as one of your methods rather than the only method of finding cases. So I think that's something we really can emphasize with our students, with our attorneys, is that this shouldn't be the only method, except in some really limited circumstances, which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay, so then we've gotten some cases and we want to kind of analyze them. So I think this is one of the real strengths, is that if there's a large volume of cases, the AI can pull out the relevant parts and give them to you. So maybe you save some time reading the cases. Again, those summaries might miss some nuance, and you might have some hallucinations or inaccuracies in those summarizations. But as long as you aren't leaving this as your only method, again, like the risk can be mitigated. So then last stage is synthesizing this all together, putting it into a written analysis. So Again, there can be some hallucinations, inaccuracies in how the cases are synthesized. You might miss some nuance. And I think this has improved quite a bit, but the model's understanding of court hierarchy may be limited. So this is something that I've noticed changing in how the models are built, but also how they're being marketed. Like I've seen Vincent from VLEX, their developers just talking about how they have now built in this understanding of court hierarchy. And so it is supposed to work that like a Supreme Court case takes precedent over a circuit court case. And kind of in a similar vein that an overruled case will not be given a lot of weight or any weight. So this is kind of, I think this is improving.
Call that before.
Unmuted. So again, some ways to really mitigate risk here. So I kind of went through, and so like, what then would I use AI for in this whole process? So I would use it for issue spotting and defining issues. I think non-legal AI is especially strong for this. When I tried to give these kind of questions to like Lexis, Westlaw, VLEX, they tried to analyze all of the issues that could potentially come up rather than just spotting them for me, and it took a long time. But I thought that non-legal AI worked well. Explaining well-established elements and standards. I think you still, if you have a secondary source available, want to take a look at it, but it can lead you to that and can help you kind of help you get those in your head. Finding statutes and regulations, finding case law, but just kind of be careful of irrelevant things coming in, both in statutes or regulations that are kind of like outside of the scope of what you're looking for, as well as in case law, cases that are outside of your jurisdiction, or cases that have like a red flag on them. And then for both of those, like, be aware that it may not be completely comprehensive, right? And that you may need to use some other methods as well. And then I've got a few tips for working with AI in this back and forth way. One is to define issues clearly and go one issue at a time. I wonder if some of the problems that the students had in the University of Minnesota study is that they tried to do too much at once and ended up kind of like overwhelming the system. They don't like to do more than one thing at a time. So you kind of got to break it down. And this may change, like as you may have heard that like agentic AI is kind of like the new buzzword in AI circles, that they want to have AI that can do multiple steps. But right now, it's not really designed to work that way. So you need to do that breaking down by issue and sub-issue the way that you already teach your students and attorneys to do. If you can get to a secondary source, still read that secondary source. I don't think secondary sources are done. I have heard vendors, again, try to say like, maybe in the future we won't need secondary sources anymore because everything is we can just create them ad hoc using AI. But the problem with that is when I go into these, if I have an issue, I'm much more likely to get a good answer if it's something that a secondary source already exists on, because they're pulling from that secondary source. So if they're giving you that, might as well go read it, use your context navigation to look kind of around in the chapter, see if there's anything else that is relevant. Also pay attention to context for statutes. Again, like I would really love to be able to limit by like title or even chapter for when I look in a statute, because a lot of times I know the answer is going to be in this title. I don't need you, if I'm asking an SEC question, I don't need you to go like digging in other parts of the code. It's going to be in one title. So pay attention to that context. If it's pulling up an answer that seems like from a totally different area of law or a different chapter or title, or when you go into that statute, if you look at the headings and say, this doesn't seem quite on point. So again, these are the things that we already teach in legal research, and we can teach them in this AI era too. And then just like read the cases and be curious. Like we teach students when they read cases, like if you come across a primary authority, if you like the same case is cited over and over again, go read that case. See if there's any other cases that cite to that case. So I don't think that any of these tips are new. Like this is all stuff we're already doing, and I think we can continue to do it as we're helping students work with AI. So then I wondered, I've spent most of this time talking about steps in this process and how we can go back and forth. Are there any circumstances where we could like use the AI as an intern and say, AI, go do this project. I'm just gonna like check your sites and give it a vibe check once you're done and then send it on out the door. And just to remind you, a bunch of this stuff is gonna get skipped. So all of the like looking around, finding additional sources, looking backwards and forth of those sources, that's not happening. Instead, you're going to get their limited set of sources, and it's going to give you an answer based on that. So I've just kind of like reiterated together here, like all of the risks that we've already talked about, all of the ways to mitigate risks that we've already talked about. The ways to mitigate the risk are mostly to do all of the other steps in the legal research process. So that's not going to be it may not be super helpful in saving time. One of the things I'd really love to see, by the way, is a study that says how much time does it take to get to like a viable work product? And will AI save you time to get to a viable work product? Because a lot of these, it's like, yeah, the accuracy was about the same when the students did it, but it took them a lot less time. But it took them less time to produce something that was probably subpar, and that if you turned it into a partner, you would get in trouble. So how much effort does it take to produce something really good? So anyway, I kind of am digressing a little bit, but to truly mitigate the risk, you would need to do all of these things. But nevertheless, there are some cases where perhaps the benefit is so high, you get such a speed advantage, and the risk is maybe low. Maybe you don't care if it is 100% accurate. So maybe there are some areas where you still are using AI like an intern. I think for all of these, the risk is greatly reduced if you have experience in the area. So I think it's interesting that people are focusing on how junior attorneys can use all of these products, when I think really the like big multipliers would be if senior attorneys are using them. And I don't think that's happening a ton, at least from talking to vendors. They have some who are like really on board, but like by and large, it's the junior attorneys who are being trained on it. So, okay, you can use AI as an intern when your likelihood of error is low. So if you've got just like simple rules-based questions, basic definitions, basic threshold tests, you think there's a low likelihood that AI wouldn't find the right thing, low likelihood that they would get it wrong. You just need a precedent check for a well-established area of law that you already know. Kind of a similar way to how an experienced lawyer might use a treatise, or the kind of assignment I got all the time when I was a junior attorney, like go look in the treatise and see what it says and then tell me. I'm like, well, you could do that, but okay, I'll do it for you. So likelihood of error is low. Also, if consequences of error are low. So maybe it's just an initial assessment or issue spotting, or like sometimes what I did as a senior attorney is I would have to gauge how intensive a research project was as I'm getting ready to give an assignment to a junior attorney. And those kind of cases, I think, could be like incredibly helpful as like that first stage of saying, okay, what issue do we have here? And how can it be broken up? And then I think there's probably some cases where speed matters more than depth. So if it's an emergency, so I've had many of those calls from the courthouse where they say like, quick, I need a case on this, or quick, what's the standard for this? And maybe that's an instance where finding it fast is okay, because then if you get it wrong, you look like less of an idiot maybe than if you put it in a brief, right? You say, well, my junior just found this. It's probably right. If you are like able to assess more theories than you could with just the human power that you have. So again, I had this quite a bit as a practicing attorney, where there was never an end to the research I was asked to do. If I finished a research project, there was another research project right away, like, well, what about this theory? What about this theory? What about this theory? And eventually there wasn't enough time to do all of them. So maybe assessing multiple theories like that would be something that could be useful. If you have a query that is run regularly, like if you are monitoring a regulatory area, or if you are trying to keep up in an area of law and you just have a regular query that maybe you run every month through an AI system, it can help alert you to what is out there. So rather than having like maybe like a case alert going and then sending that case alert to a junior attorney and saying, summarize that for me, maybe you just run something like this once a month and it brings things to your attention. And then I have like another here, like the question's broad but not deep. So if it's across like multiple areas of law that no one could possibly be an expert in all of those areas of law, and you've got kind of like intersections, that maybe in that case, you wouldn't be able to find like attorney to research this, attorney to research this, attorney to research this. And maybe it's more helpful if it's done faster and going across all of those. Okay, so those were some of my ideas about how you could use AI as an intern to kind of like offload some, but still checking it, right? Then I think there's a handful of projects. And I think this will become greater as we see AI become a little more structured. But like when I think about what I want to automate in my legal research process, like what is my laundry and dishes, it is usually the stuff where I have to do the same thing over and over again, like, oh, for 50 jurisdictions. Or if I'm doing like I have to do a lot of these at my school, and I did at my previous school too. Like, what are other law schools doing on this, right? So you have to run the same Google search like 20 times for all of your peer schools. So those are things where automation could help, like just take those results, analyze them for me, put them in a chart. And I just want to get like a quick overview looking that way. So again, I think this is something that we'll probably see more of, but a few places where I see it is reviewing a large number of cases. So you have a lot of cases to look at, and you just want to get a quick look at if they're relevant or not. You have more cases than ChatGPT or Lexis AI or Vincent or whatever can handle at once. So I don't know if people have heard of this project MidPage. I really, really like them. They have academic accounts for $10 a month. So if you want to check it out, you may try it. So you can run your search. You can put as many of these columns as you want. So this was one of the questions in the University of Minnesota study, actually. They looked at covenants, non-compete covenants, and whether they're enforceable. So I did this search. It actually gave me a suggested Boolean search. These people like librarians is the other reason I like them. So they give a suggested Boolean search, and then they give you the results. And so I asked, did the court find a legitimate business interest in each of these cases? And if it's a yes/no question, you can filter it. So I filtered it here to only yes. And then I asked what industry was the employer in, because I was looking for like kind of similar industries. So then I can quickly scan through and see like, are any of these somewhat similar to my industry? And the way that they built this is a lot of engineering, because they have to say, send the call out, put the answer here, send the next call out, put the answer here. So it's more than I could do with just ChatGPT. So I find this really, really useful. And I'm hoping that it'll be incorporated in more products. And then the other place I see automation helping is if you are, again, like running lots of searches at once. So Vincent lets you do this with 50 state surveys. So you can choose all of your jurisdictions, ask the same question in each jurisdiction you select. And then for each of those jurisdictions, you'll get a pretty detailed memo. So I found it like pretty accurate too, especially if the question is a pretty simple one. Like, is there a part of the statute that in this case, I was looking for states where recreational marijuana is legal. Can local governments restrict still what facilities are allowed in their area? So it's a pretty simple question for the AI to parse, right? And I found like some of the deep research products are quite good on this too. So if anyone is paying like the $20 a month for ChatGPT or Gemini, or any of those, like check out their deep research tools. So this was a chart that I generated with ChatGPT deep research before I ran out of my searches. Like you get a few per month. And I think one of the things that Ethan Mollick said is he was kind of like introducing that framework of things that are automated, things that are like centaur tasks, things that are human tasks, is that the automated will probably get to be more. As we understand workflows a little bit better, and as people come up with workflows that might work for AI, I think we'll start to see them being able to be structured a little bit better in that way. Okay, so that is everything I have. I have a link here for my slides. I guess one last thing I'll say, just as because it was kind of like blowing up my mind as I was thinking about this presentation, I'm on LinkedIn way too much, and people were talking about this Minnesota study, and I said like, oh, I thought it was really surprising that the time benefits were so limited. And Damian Reel, who's at VLEX and is very knowledgeable about all of this stuff, was like, yeah, but maybe, and he kind of called it vibe coding that's happening with programmers, that like even experienced programmers, they're like kind of just like going back and forth with the AI and like getting good enough to get to minimum viable product, and that's all they care about. And like that's a use of AI that is impactful. So he's like, maybe in the legal context, clients don't care if it's that good in some circumstances. I'll say that does not jive with my experience at a law firm. Clients want to ask you every little detail about the research you've done. So part of the point of doing the research isn't just to have done it and produce a memo to the client. It's also to understand it well enough that you can answer all of those really detailed questions from the client. But maybe there are instances, and maybe we will start to see that pressure from law firms that are from clients to say like, why are you having a junior attorney spend 50 hours on this? Couldn't legal AI have done it? And even if that's not true, we might still start to see those pressures. And so I think that behooves us even more to think about, does that change how we need to teach legal research? Are there ways that we can still get high accuracy while still incorporating these products and reducing time? So that's all I've got. Happy to take questions from anyone.
In the Minnesota study, you mentioned a little bit that they discussed cognitive stickiness, if you will. Has there been any studies or any discussion of the cases that are primary law or coming up that are going to be very new but important, like in 2015 with Heartland coming out and changing the way that patent law can do? How is AI being used, or is it a detriment in the stickability of the juniors to retain the changes of the law?
That's interesting. So I think for one, I would say that like, I'm not sure that the products themselves are that great at that, of finding those like really sticky cases. But then as far as like how, if they're doing all of this legal research and then they give their product, like, are they able to remember what they just did? Is that kind of part of what you're asking? Yeah. So I don't know of any studies looking at that in the legal research context, but there definitely are in other contexts. So one just came out. I haven't read it yet, but it just came out. They looked at they looked at students again, and they looked at them doing studying with an AI and then without an AI. And they looked at before they studied and after, during the time of their study and after. And they found that while they were studying, the students performed much better with an AI, but afterwards they actually performed worse than the control. And so they weren't retaining the things that they learned. So I think that does kind of speak to your question that if they're kind of like offloading that ability to like work through sources and figure out how does this tie into what the previous law was, and like, whoa, that's a big change, I can't believe they did that, that maybe that does reduce the stickiness, but I think that would be an interesting thing to study more.
Thank you.
Are you hearing back from graduates that are, going the first time, first year in law firms that they weren't prepared to how to use AI? Or are you hearing from firms like we want them to know how to use all these products? I mean, what are you hearing?
So I'm hearing that like the bigger firms are doing their own training. So those of you from firms probably can confirm that. But like the smaller and medium-sized firms, that like that training is not happening. So it's not necessarily that they're asking for it, it's that they don't even know that it's something that they should be doing. But people at those firms aren't not using AI. They are still using it. And if there aren't tools that the firm has bought for them, they're still using like ChatGPT. So I think that kind of also says to us that we maybe should be thinking about how to teach those free or more widely available AI products within legal research. Like for a while before the free ChatGPT got access to the internet, I was teaching my students, let's like, don't use it for legal research. Like absolutely do not. It doesn't have access to the cases, it's gonna hallucinate. But now the free version of ChatGPT does have access to the internet. And maybe there is a use for it. And I feel like I'm still working that out, whether that's something that I really want to open the floodgates to. And again, I think it's probably something where I would like to know how, like, I would like some benchmarking on how accurate it is actually.
Because part of our trial court, we don't have AI at all. We have for the appellate court, so we have clerks that, clerks coming in, where is it? And you're going back to your basics, like, it's okay, it'll be okay.
Yeah, I have been finding though, I guess that students are, like when I first started teaching this and I asked for the hands, like how many people have used AI, I got very few hands and now I get everyone. And there are a few like surveys that come out that like college students overwhelmingly are using AI on their assignments. So that's who's coming into law schools and into the profession, is they're used to using it that way. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if,
Okay.
like, when you ask a question, are you using AI? Is everybody even aware if they are? Like, just a regular Google search is using AI. And so do you know, or has it been studied, like the difference between what if you gave this question to ChatGPT and you gave it to Google, and what would the differences?
I don't know. I'm trying to think if this, I just read about a study that looked at, I think it looked at multiple, yes, it did. It looked at multiple AI tools. So I think it looked at like Google, ChatGPT, etc. And what they did is they asked, they gave an excerpt from an article and they asked the AI, like, find the title of this and give me a link to it. So it should be like a pretty simple task for, I would hope, for an AI to do. And they found like that is really bad at it, like across the board, all the tools, but some of them were a little better, some of them were a little worse. Google was actually pretty good at saying, I don't know the answer to this. So that's like that's a kind of response I would want to see. But to get to your question of like accuracy across the board, I haven't seen a lot of those comparing like research result accuracy.
You've got an online question?
Oh, yeah. You can go ahead and talk.
Hi, Rebecca. It's Steph Grace. I'm at UC Davis. And I wanted to say first, thank you so much for touching on some of the cognitive impacts. That is my focus of study. I have a paper coming out on that soon and would be happy to talk with you or with anyone else that has questions about that area and discuss more about it. Because I think it's a really important thing that we're not thinking about enough yet, especially for those of us that are teaching law students. But my question to you today is, do you have tips? I'm sure you do. So maybe the better question is, what are your best tips for those of us that are tasked with evaluating these different tools, whether it's for use in the classroom or for demonstration to faculty or in the firm setting? As we're looking at all the different tools and the information overloads that come, from the vendors and the new tools that are coming out every day, what's the best way to stay on top of that in terms of tracking and benchmarking?
Yeah, that's a big question. Um, so I think like the studies that have come out are useful. So if you are looking at evaluating products, I think it is helpful to read those studies. So like the Val study, the University of Minnesota study. I also think like the more of us that are doing testing like in public, the better it's going to be for all of us. So some of you might have seen the SCAL Smackdown, I think they called it, where they looked at a bunch of different legal research tools and just like analyzed the results. So they did that at their institute maybe a month or two ago. And then Bob and Bergie wrote an article about it. So made it like very public, right? So I think that stuff is really great because it's such, to me, it seems like such a waste of time for all of us to be doing this individually, over and over and over again when we could be collective about it. So I'm actually working with a group of librarians now. We've been working for a while, but I think we're finally starting to get some stuff out ready for publication of like, again, just like kind of that task comparison and evaluating it to a rubric. So if you are doing this kind of work, I guess I would encourage you to think about a way like maybe of making it public if it's possible. I know for some of you at firms that may be trickier. But if you are an academic, like you can just write a blog post about it, right? And then as far as like doing your own internal evaluations, I know there's a lot of law firms that are doing a really good job with this and that they have like kind of teams set up where they will have the same question they run through multiple systems and develop a rubric and apply the rubric. Super time intensive. But I do think that is helpful in evaluating. And then if you have your question, maybe you can ask it again in a couple months and see if the response has changed. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I have a great answer on that. Other questions? I think we have like 3 more minutes.
Out in New York, where I have come from, the federal appeals court has given as the baseline of competence to avoid discipline, certifying that you have read every case from caption to affirmed reverse. I don't know about any other place in the country, but for those of us in trying to put the fear of God into our students, do you have any tips in the AI context of since when I went to law school, when dinosaurs walked the earth 30 years ago until now, that has been the mantra from librarians and legal researchers: find, read, and then take the next step. We haven't come up with anything, so if you have wonderful ideas elsewhere, we'd love to hear them.
Well, I actually do make my students read the Mata Vie Bianca opinion, and that usually does scare them a little bit. So you might choose an opinion where a judge has come down really hard on attorneys. I also do exercises where I will have them do like kind of try to create the hallucination on their own. Like I'll give them some prompts that I have found are pretty likely to introduce hallucinations and have them do those. But as far as like just like the process of reading the case, actually one thing I found, I'm teaching a technology course this semester. And I have my students analyze like different legal tech products. And one of them looked at the case summary tool in Lexis, where it just says like, boom, here's your case summary, right? And when they actually looked at that and analyzed if it did a good job compared to this person did it they had done a clerk fellowship, judicial fellowship, and they did it for cases they were asked to summarize during their fellowship. So when they compared that, they saw how much it fell short. And I wonder if you could design something like that where they are kind of like comparing it to good work product and seeing like how does it measure up to show them like you can't rely on the summary. It's not going to give you every issue you need. It might have mistakes in summarization. So yeah, I think maybe that kind of exercise could be helpful. I didn't know that though, that read the whole, I don't think I always read cases from the beginning to the end, you know, there's a lot of skimming going on, so that's kind of scary. Yes.
Not sure if we have time, but I had one last online question that's come in. It says I'm just going to read it. It says, I have a similar question echoing Stephanie. Yesterday, we covered 20 AI tools in 20 minutes, and with today's suggestions, there really is so much out there. If we are being asked to recommend a purchasing plan for an entity, how would you suggest narrowing down our plan to just a few tools?
So I think I would look at and this is a question we as librarians, like probably one of the first questions we always look at is like, what does it have access to? Does it have access to the sources that you need? Like if you need international sources, probably VLEX is going to be like the only thing you would be able to use AI with, right? If you need regulatory sources, ask them like what is included in your databases that the AI has access to. And then I think probably if you're just talking about legal research, there isn't all that much. So I think you probably could compare those in kind of a comprehensive way to say like, if we're going to buy one of these, it's going to be one of like 4 or 5. But you also might consider starting with one of the smaller ones that are like quite inexpensive. And maybe that's a way that you could like kind of get your feet wet. So like all of these startups, their plans are much, much less than like Alexis or AI or Vincent. So that could be one way too. Right. I see that I've gone over a little bit, so I'm sorry, but thank you all.
So we're gonna take a break till 11:15. So there's fresh coffee and snacks, and then we'll hear from Christy. We'll be back online at 11:15.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
At work. Yeah, I have laptops, but
Pretty much.
I was like,